Good evening, Stephen. We start here this afternoon. The European Union will ban new sales of fossil fuel cars from 2035 after a new law was approved earlier this week. This comes as Brussels also draws up plans to slash carbon emission from trucks and buses. Now, to help unpack what the implications are for markets such as South Africa and the rest of the continent, I'm joined by MasterDrive CEO Eugene Herbert. Thank you so much for your time, Eugene.
A pleasure. Good afternoon, and to the viewers.
Now, Eugene, it's been quite a while in the working. Talk us through this new law and what it actually means for car manufacturers.
Well, if we can look at it from two different perspectives, there was a target set for 2050 as zero emissions on vehicles, and they should have achieved roughly 50% by 2030. But at that time, while there were a number of things that were proposed, nothing was quite definitive as yet and give them a specific target to work toward. And now this is what the European Parliament has done. But interestingly, of the 340 votes, of the total votes, 340 were for and 279 against and 21 abstentions. So you kind of question whether or not everybody is on board. But given the fact that it is now it is law, but it's going to be formally approved at the next parliamentary sitting. And that means that any manufacturer is not, after 2035, going to be able to sell any new vehicle that is powered by either petrol or diesel. Now, it's phenomenal, but there are some exceptions. For example, a manufacturer producing less than 10,000 will have some leeway for a little bit of time. And I gather that they're working hard to get China on board, who are producing a massive amount or plan to release a massive amount of electric vehicles. But if I can just touch on from a South African perspective, I don't know that anybody can guarantee that we will have power stability by then to give the man in the street vehicles that can be charged by by the power system. Not entirely insurmountable, but that's it. But just think about the implication of South African manufacturers who are exporting vehicles to that 27 bloc in the European Union. They won't be able to export the current vehicles that we are having South Africa or doing. And then, of course, there's also the implication for tax, and this, I imagine, must apply to a number of countries. What the government takes by way of taxes on fuel, on petrol and diesel, is absolutely phenomenal. So if that's not there, there will be a massive drain on the reserves that will go into the coffers of the taxman.
Eugene, now you've touched on those implications for South Africa, but looking at the rest of the continent where they might not necessarily have that energy crisis, are we looking at the same picture when it comes to car manufacturers that are in South Africa and other parts of the continent?
Look, we're talking about what's primarily going to take place in Europe. There is an incentive by the states, by President Biden, to give incentives for people who would like to produce green vehicles. But if you think about Africa, we're still so heavily reliant on petrol and diesel engine vehicles, and even some of them are operating and will continue to operate not conforming with Euro level 2 or 3. Currently we're sitting 5 and 6. So whether or not Africa as a continent can aim toward reducing those CO2 emissions is going to be really, really difficult. But we've got to start somewhere. And I think with South Africa being at the kind of the leading powerhouse in Africa, with the new EVs coming into the market, we are gradually getting a change in sentiment. Some of the reservations that people have had. Of course, let's not forget the power system or Eskom's power grids. But there are organizations and there's manufacturers rolling out vehicles. So there's every reason to be positive. But let's not think it's going to make an immediate change. They're talking about the sale of new vehicles. The vehicles on the road will be around for a while still before they cycled out of the system. And then, of course, there's also older vehicles that are sold as used. And Africa is, in some instances, a dumping ground for those vehicles. So, in my opinion, we probably will see more of those dumped into Africa who pay the price of development in first world countries.
And Eugene, it is about just over a decade, where it's supposed to be that 100% cut in emissions. How can manufacturers in South Africa and the rest of the continent actually prepare themselves to be ready to get into that market by 2035?
Well, I would imagine, not being privy to the discussions, but I can only imagine that we've got some really astute OEMs in South Africa. They would have already factored this in, and they will be endeavoring to make sure that they can offer something. There could be manufacture of certain vehicles here. But remember, we are only talking about them exporting to 27 countries in the European Union. The rest of the world is open still. And even though we do see moves in Australia to emulate what's happening in the UK with regard to reducing or preventing the sale of petrol and diesel engine vehicles, there is still going to be a market out there for ICE vehicles, because at the moment I think there's about 15% passenger vehicles contribute to about 15% of CO2 emissions, and I think the commercial vehicles, trucks, etc., running on diesel account for about a quarter. So we will still be living with that for a while, way beyond 2035.
Eugene, that's all the time we have this afternoon. We'll have to leave it there for now. Of course, that was Eugene Herbert, who is MasterDrive CEO, helping us get our heads around the European Union banning the new sales of fossil fuel-powered cars from 2035.